For this glazing demo, I'm going to show you pouring and dipping a vessel. So we're going to be doing number 4, 5, and 6 on the glazing ticket. So I made sure that my glaze is all mixed up. It's at the correct viscosity. I need a nice clean cup. My piece has been sponged off, and I've waxed the bottom. So number 1 and 2 on the glaze ticket are taken care of. Okay, so right now we are working on pouring. So you should have chosen your color. So I chose a Mazarine blue. Notice that the color kind of looks purple, so don't judge a book by its cover. So I'm going to take my clean cup. I'm going to pour it about 2/3 or so up the interior of my vessel. And I'm going to swirl it around. Now this tends to be a thicker glaze, so I don't want to let it sit in there too long. If you let it sit too long, it will melt the piece. Notice as I pour out into my main bucket, I'm turning the piece so it coats that area going up to the rim. So I missed a little bit, so I'm going to let it sit. So depending on how much you let it sit in one spot versus another, you get a little bit different color. Now this particular glaze isn't good for a lot of textured areas just because it tends to be a little on the thicker side because it's got mason stain as its colorant versus say an oxide. Alright, so I tend to drip along the sides, hence one of the reasons why I like to do the interior first, so that way I can wipe it off without disturbing my exterior glaze. So I'm going to just wipe that off so I get a nice clean line around my rim, just using a damp sponge. So anytime that you make a mistake, you can wash it off as long as it doesn't have a color underneath it. Alright, so now I'm going to do some dipping. Alright, so I'm going to dip to about that middle, that very middle line. So I'm just going to hold it. And I'm going to tilt the bucket just because it's a little bit shallow. You can do that with any bucket. And I'm just going to leave it in there for a couple of seconds. Make sure I'm getting my line nice and even. And then let it drip, because if I turn it upside down, or right side up I suppose, it's going to drip down the side, and I don't want that. So it should be kind of wet and shiny looking, so once it starts turning kind of a chalky tone to where the glaze is, then I can turn it right side up. So it shouldn't drip anymore at that point. Now if your glaze starts to get a cracked look, you want to redo it. If it looks cracked, that means it's too thick. But in this case, I didn't have any cracking, so it should be okay. Alright, so I'm just getting a brush wet because I did get my line a little uneven. So any stiff brush you can use to wash off your glaze, like I said, as long as there's no glaze underneath it. So I want to get a nice crisp line. So this would be an alternative to doing a color, waxing, and dipping it in another color and having to wait. You can just wash it off. Now, it's not super important that I do this because I do have a straight line where my glaze stopped, but I want to have a nice crisp area where that line is when I do my second dip into my other color. Okay, now we'll leave a little bit of residue, so I'll just kind of go over with a sponge just to make sure it's nice and clean. Check all the way around, and I should be ready to go. Alright, before I move on to my next color, I'm going to make sure that any excess color gets dumped back into the correct bucket. It's not as big a deal for like the blue, but especially like the white and the clear, it's kind of hard to tell. So make sure you do the correct one. Alright, so now I'm moving over to my matte white. I've mixed it up, and now I am dipping it. Okay, I'm just putting my hand on the inside of the vessel. Could also use the tongs if I wanted to. I'm just holding it there. Notice that the wax resist, it's just kind of running away. If the wax resist wasn't there, I'd really have to scrub the bottom of this piece to get all the glaze off. But if you don't wipe off even those little beads, that'll cause it to stick to the kiln. But it's just a little bit easier to clean. So I'm going to take my big sponge. And wiping off the bottom. Alright, so I don't want to touch that because it's nice and wet still. Now if I wanted, I could paint on more color right in that interior of my recessed foot, but for this case I'm not going to. I'm not going to worry about it too much. If I wanted to, instead of using my hand, I could have used a tongs. Just make sure you dab wherever the tongue marks leave. Good luck!